Dear listeners and viewers, welcome to the 8th episode of Riga Security Forum 2024. My name is Beāte Livdanska. I'm researcher at the Latvian Institute of International Affairs and visiting lecturer at Riga University. In this episode, we delve into the disturbing reality of state-sponsored violence in Belarus, its impact on the upcoming 2025 so-called presidential elections in Belarus, and also the broader implications for international security. To discuss these issues today with me in the studio here in Riga and joining me online, I have two very distinguished guests. Joining me here studio in person in Riga is former ambassador from Latvia to Belarus, resident in Riga, Mr. Einars Semanis. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Joining us online is Dr. Anaïs Marin, Associate Fellow with Russia and Eurasia Program at Chatham House in London, and former UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus from 2018 to 2024. Welcome, Dr. Marin.
Thank you, Beāte. Very happy to be here with you today.
It is not a secret nor a surprise to anyone who's been following closely to political situation in Belarus that since 2022, almost 5 years ago now, Belarus reached a point of no return in its delicate so-called balancing act between Russia and the West. Desperate for support, so-called President Lukashenko has become increasingly even more reliant on Moscow, on Russia, than it was before 2022. By being involved, not directly, but by being involved in Russia's war against Ukraine. And on the other hand, when looking at the domestic level, we see that at the same time, Lukashenko's authoritarian regime in Belarus has tightened its grip on power since 22, marked by brutal crackdown on dissent, widespread human rights abuses, and pervasive atmosphere of fear through systematically targeting political opponents, independent media, cultural sector, and civil society activists through arbitrary arrests, torture, and politically motivated prosecutions. And I would like to start our discussion by delving deep into this issue of human rights abuses, which is no surprise that at the moment we are not talking only about human rights abuses in Belarus. We call it a humanitarian crisis, right? And we should use this term when talking about Belarus. And knowing that Lukashenko regime's use of state violence has had far-reaching effects, how has this impacted the international system? And looking from the perspective of bordering countries, smaller countries, for example, Latvia and Lithuania, what would be your take on this, Mr. Semanis? How you see this problem? How this has impacted the neighboring countries?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the invitation to this discussion. Thank you to the Latvian Institute of International Affairs for keeping issue of Belarus on the international agenda. It is very, very important in this security situation, and therefore this discussion in the framework of Security Forum is really in time and really very, very important. Thank you. And I am very honored to be in this discussion together with outstanding expert on human rights in Belarus, Dr. Marin. That's great honor and responsibility, by the way. So about neighborhood and situation in Belarus. I would like to say in the beginning that there is one axiomatic truth. It is impossible to have security without democracy. Dictatorships are aggressive towards their nations and towards their neighbors. And as a neighbor, we could see today that Belarus is aggressive, and therefore there is security threat, and we feel it as a neighbor. What kind of security threat? At least we could see that, first of all, you said, and therefore there is Dr. Marin, that there is aggression towards their own nation. Belarusian nation, suffering of hundreds of thousands. And it is a tragedy, and we see as a neighbor. We are very close. We could see in other areas aggression. For example, there was a case of state terrorism in airspace, Ryanair case. Or, again, another tragedy, instrumentalization of illegal migration, or the so-called hybrid wars. And Lukashenko's regime is co-aggressor. Co-aggressor to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. So this makes, for us as a neighbor, situation really, really full of concern. Because neighborhood relation is that we know each other, and not only know, we have experience. And today, we are very, very worried about it. But in general terms, if you ask what we would like to see in Belarus in the future, what is our position? It is a position of democratic countries. We would like to see Belarus free, independent, democratic, and European. So here is how we see Belarus. And we are not identifying Belarusian nation with Lukashenko regime. That is how we could speak and we could see the situation as a neighbor.
Of course. Thank you. And if we look at this from international perspective, if we put it on a map, not only for neighboring countries, which is of course directly affected by this, since, as you mentioned, Mr. Semanis, Belarus has become an aggressor, of course. But if we put it in a perspective from international point of view, Dr. Marin, what would be your stance? How this could or is impacting international system in general? How can this implicates to other countries, not only neighboring countries?
First, I second what His Excellency just said about the importance of democracy for peace and security. From my perspective as previous UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights, of course, being a European, I am very much concerned about the fact that we have on our continent a country that still applies the death penalty, a country that shows, unfortunately, how resilient and resistant an autocratic regime can be 30 years on. And this is problematic for us, for our future as a European family to which Belarus is supposed to belong. That such a regime, in spite of its terror tactics towards its own population, and in spite of the nuisance power that it exerts on its neighbor, is surviving and not willing to change in any way. And of course, we have hinted already at the fact that this resilience is mostly due to the support that Mr. Lukashenko is enjoying from Russia in many ways, in economic, political, diplomatic, etc. But it also points to some limitations of the international system towards such regimes, such governments, which feel that they can commit extremely serious human rights violations, which in the case of Belarus have been equated to possibly crimes against humanity. It's not me saying it, it's the High Commissioner for Human Rights himself in his latest reports, who stressed this, that some of the violations that have been taking place in 2020 in the context of the last contested presidential elections and in the follow-up of these elections during the crackdown on opposition, some of the violations might amount to crimes against humanity. And here we are with such a regime, such a massive human rights offender right at our doorstep, or we would like to actually see it within our European family. And we know that Belarusians are Europeans. And this regime is unhampered in its relentless effort at stifling dissent in any form, violating human rights in a massive, systematic way, and the international community appears as unable to stop this catastrophic human rights situation from developing, from harming the well-being and the health of so many people inside Belarus and outside as well, because as you know, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians have been compelled to exile because of these massive human rights violations.
And from your perspective, Dr. Marin, if this state-sponsored, unchecked violence towards Belarusian people goes unchecked for even more longer periods of time, what would be the greater implications for international norms and institutions as such, if we cannot stop this?
Well, of course, this is a matter of very serious concern. And as you know, at the Human Rights Council has kept attention on Belarus for more than 12 years now, with my mandate, for example, but also in other formats. The Council of Europe, as well, the OSCE, have underlined how, unfortunately, how toothless we are to actually defend and protect and uphold human rights in Belarus. What kind of challenge does that represent for internationally? It's hard to say. What I would like to say is that it points to the limitations of our system, of the United Nations in particular, in the face of these of such regimes. Belarus appears as an anomaly inside on the European continent, but it's unfortunately absolutely not isolated at the UN, where a majority of countries are actually non-democracies, and nowadays a majority of the population in the world lives in an imperfect or partial or illiberal democracy, if not in an outright autocratic regime. This is unfortunately the reality, and it makes all the international conventions that have been adopted in the aftermath of the Second World War, during the decolonization in the 1990s. All these international conventions protecting human rights are being challenged by the practices, by the undemocratic practices of governments that not only refuse to have international scrutiny into their human rights affairs, saying it's domestic affairs, but also claim that those that do uphold human rights and democratic values, notably Western countries, are actually not in their full right in doing so. And therefore, we can see in the UN a huge wave of challenging the authority of the very institutions that were established, and suggesting that we should replace them because they are not representative of this undemocratic majority. And the question arises of what to replace them with. There is currently no alternative, nothing better than the UN and all this system of conventions that we have that we have adopted, and that we should, on the contrary, try and reinforce and uphold. But it is definitely not an easy task.
Yeah, completely agree. Because also what can be noted here is that we have to see activities from states per se, right? We saw what Lithuania did. Lithuania requested the Office of International Criminal Court to investigate alleged crimes against humanity in the Republic of Belarus. So that's also one act of courage, how to put this issue to light, right? For states to be more active. Mr. Semanis, from your perspective, is there anything that small countries such as Lithuania and Latvia, of course, what can we do to better this situation, to raise awareness, perhaps, how we can help to smother the situation out?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to agree what was said by Dr. Marin about influence on international system and what are the consequences and problems. Jumping a little bit immediately forward, from diplomatic point of view, how it is in diplomacy, what are consequences? Generally, for democracies, for European Union, we should have strategic patience together with strategic consequence, consistency. That is the situation, and we face it. We should work hard, and it is different. We could interpret what is consistency in different ways, but the most important it is what I said in the beginning, that we should keep our policy to see Belarus as independent, free, democratic, and European. European identity is underlined by the democratic forces of Belarus. It came very strongly in 2023 Congress of Democratic Forces. It was underlined that Belarus should be part of Europe, is part of Europe, was part of Europe. And we know that European identity is one of the most important identities of Belarus. So if you ask me what we could do as a neighbors, you mentioned Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, it is first of all to support, to work hard that Europe is returning to Belarus, or Belarus returning to Europe. We could use both formulas. It is a general framework, and here raise awareness, here to speak out, to put it on international agenda, in international organizations. That is very, very important. And in this case, we should, and we do it, and demonstrate support in cooperation with democratic forces, not only in general terms, not only with the Office of Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya in Vilnius and Transitional Cabinet in Vilnius, and Office of Pavel Latushko in Warsaw, Coordination Council, other democratic organizations, civil society organizations, but to work and cooperate, support Belarusian diasporas, democratic part of diasporas who are in Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, to work hard in international scenes to raise the issue of responsibility of Lukashenko regime. Latvian government, Latvia is supporting all the time, for example, institutions which are based in Denmark today, international solidarity funds, which are working to gather the data on violations of human rights and different crimes of Lukashenko regime. This is important. So, at the same time, we should be one of the most active part, and we are one of the most active part, to use these instruments which are in the hands of European Union and other democratic countries. For example, sanction mechanism. Not only simply to use sanctions, but to work to work hard that, for example, these loopholes which we could see in the sanction mechanism, that they should be eliminated. So, and we are active, for example, here we are one of the most active part. We should work very hard on the situation what we could see with political prisoners, especially with the so-called humanitarian list. And what is specific, for example, for Latvia, and here I should really pay special attention, because there is our own experience of awakening, to work hard every day and help and to assist with everything which is related with a national identity, national culture, national language of Belarus, because we remember our own awakening times, our own awakening in general terms. In many cases was inspired exactly by national identity issues of Latvians or Lithuania. We could see here. So there are many, how to say, dimensions. But we are one of the most active to raise real awareness, to put an agenda. And not only government, but our civil societies. And civil societies are very, very important. The help of civil societies. And I'm proud that, for example, Latvian civil society is very active and responsible. For example, the organization Platform Free Belarus. It is Latvian organization to support Belarusian democratic forces. So here we could see our role, and it is very, very important.
If we return to the fact that many Belarusians who had the choice before to vote in the consulates and cast their ballot for their favorable president, of course, are stripped that right now, and none of us, of course, has a crystal ball, and we cannot predict the outcome of this election. But of course we are realists and we know how this has unfolded for the past 30 years and even more in favor of Lukashenko. How likely would it be to expect at least something similar to what we saw regarding protests and opposition marches as we saw back in 2020? Would something like that even would be slightly possible?
I think it's very unlikely because the cost of taking part or supporting or organizing peaceful protests in Belarus is way too high. It has been made high by the government, which has repressed any such kind of expression of dissent. And the as I was saying, the playing field for the opposition is extremely restricted, but the civic space for the expression of dissenting views to appear in publicly is inexistent. It's extremely costly. The prison sentences that one is exposed to for simply calling on the internet, for example, on your Facebook or the equivalent of Contacte, to say, oh, Sunday evening, predictably the results, one more stolen election, let's meet on in the streets, the Ploshchad, like Maidan for the Ukrainians. Let's meet outside and express our discontent. If only for posting such a message, you can be held accountable by with the several articles of the criminal code, and sent to prison for several years. So many people have risked it already, and the conditions of detention for people who are labeled by the regime as extremists, notably, and calling for sanctions is an extremist crime. Criticizing Mr. Lukashenko is also exposes you to accusations of extremism. And the conditions of detention for these people, so-called political prisoners, are made particularly harsh with inhuman conditions. And we have countless reports of the arrests and detentions, especially in August 2020, not that things were much better afterwards, but during the 3-4 days just after the election, there's been massive human rights violations and beatings, systematic beatings and rapes and threats, etc. They attack indistinctively women, the elderly, children. So nobody can feel safe in that environment to uphold his or her human rights, basic fundamental rights to, for example, take part in elections, vote the way you want. There will probably be cameras to make sure that people will be forced in one way or another to vote for the incumbent. And those who don't might have problems at the workplace or other. And those who criticize the official results will, again, risk being exposed to huge human rights violations. So in this context, I don't see which courageous or suicidal opposition-minded voter or opposition leader, there are none anymore inside Belarus proper, could take any risk on the territory of Belarus. Bearing in mind also that actually the hand of the KGB and of the repressive fist of the regime can reach out to you outside of the borders of Belarus proper. It's enough to remember the situation with the Ryanair flight that was diverted and forcefully landed in Minsk in May 2021, apparently for the purpose of arresting dissidents who were on board. So in these conditions, I really doubt that there could be any kind of mobilization the way we have seen it in 2020. Maybe online, maybe differently, but definitely not in the format it had during the so-called 2020 revolution.
Yeah, unfortunately seems that it will be a slightly easy victory for the incumbent, right? Unfortunately. But if we take a step back and think about the unity of pro-democratic forces, opposition, which most of them are, of course, in exile. We see Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, we see Pavel Latushka and other forces as well. If we catch up on the question of unity of this opposition, what, from both of your perspectives, do they have similar views towards the foreign policy of Belarus after Lukashenko, or are there any fracture in this regarding also relations with Russia and etc.?
Yeah.
We will give floor to Mr. Semanis.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. So about democratic forces. So in general terms, if we compare with 2020, they are more united. They are more mature. If we take a look to what happened during these four years, they got experience. So, and democratic forces are structured around Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as a leader of democratic forces. So it means, to answer you maybe in essence, in this part of discussion, I should say that in essence, democratic forces are united. But at the same time, of course, like in all democratic forces, there are discussions. There are different views about the means how to achieve democratic, sovereign, independent, free European Belarus. So, and here we could see discussion. For example, we could see different opinions in Coordination Council itself. For example, that's what are relations with the regime? What is the strategic consistency to have dialogue or not, and so on. So this could be what I could say about democratic forces. But at the same time, we should take into account that agendas of democratic forces, which are basically in diaspora, outside Belarus, and inhabitant citizens of Belarus, today, they are quite different. We should take into account. There are common points, for example, mobility, visa issues, and so on. But other areas are quite different. Access, and here I agree with Dr. Marin, access of democratic forces, for example, to the population of Belarus today is limited. And we know why. And if we take population as such, and here I should really agree that it is frightened, it is atomized. There is a kind of internal migration in the population. They really are frozen in a way. So, and in this case, it is right what democratic forces say, and Svetlana Tsikhanovka says, please, citizens of Belarus, take care of your security, survive, be secure. So it is really, it's such a sacrifice to go to the streets. That's a big question. Here is this dilemma. Well, we could see, and situation is quite tragic. If we try to understand the regime as such today, here we should be in a way realistic and maybe pessimistic as well, because Lukashenko is in survival regime. In a way, he has stabilized this regime. He is using different approaches. For example, he's saying that he's a guarantee of stability of in Belarus, that there is no, for example, war situation in Belarus, that Belarusian army is not taking active part in aggressive war of Russia in Ukraine. This is important, by the way, in the general discussion we have in the Security Forum, how it is, that this status quo is important. So that is, if we could take a look at this situation today. Therefore, I mentioned in the beginning about diplomatic tools, strategic patience with strategic consistency. So, and it is important to, in a way, to understand what could be the main scenarios here. What's the development regime could go. What are the possibilities? There is nobody could say exactly how it will go in Belarus. There are different prognoses, but there are quite many scenarios. In many cases, it depends how the situation will be in Ukraine.
Of course.
Yes, here we could see, coming out from this, we could see what kind of possibilities are there. There are several possibilities. If there is time, I could go in and describe them. But there are differences. But as today, if we analyze scenarios in relation to Lukashenko himself, we could see that he is not giving up. He is very active in his campaign, promoting himself, and the so-called elections, which are fiction, which is falsification, which is fraud. Anyway, the major scenario is that he will really survive and keep his position as a president. Analysis says that so-called Nazarbayev scenario will not work in Belarus. At the same time, of course, there is analysis of the so-called black swan scenarios as well. So we could see what happens in this situation. So if we speak about regime, it really depends what is success, the so-called success of Russia. If it is successful for Belarus, it means for Lukashenko that there will be the move towards more pressure to be loyal to Russia, to have so-called Union State project finished. If Russia is not successful, there could be another scenarios, and there are at least 3-4, for example, negotiating between some part of nomenclature of Lukashenko with democratic forces, or really change under the pressure of the society in Belarus itself. First of all, because of economic reasons, it could be transformation of regime as such. It is probability is very low, but anyways there could be external change which is a result of external intervention. So therefore we could see many possibilities. Time frame analysis say different time we could see. As to Lukashenko, usually 10 years approximately. As to regime as such, more than 10 years. So, but this is a, how to say, very specific discussion. So, but in general terms, Lukashenko is in surviving regime.
There are a lot of scenarios, of course, for the future and how this situation can unfold. But of course, and you said everything completely right. There are a lot of pieces of this puzzle which is unknown, and how they will play out. But taking a step a bit back, Dr. Marin, from your perspective, how united is the opposition 4 years after the rigged elections of 2022?
It's in my view, it is united enough given the what it has to uphold at this stage, and I want to really pay tribute to the efforts and resilience and courage of all the members of the opposition, of the Belarusian opposition in very difficult circumstances, for doing what is, in my view, very important. And the only thing they can do at this stage is first keep on talking about political prisoners in Belarus, about these over 1,400 people who are being arbitrarily detained, some of them, like the husband of Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, sentenced on abusive charges to 18 years in prison. This is not an isolated case, and as you know, there are many journalists, analysts, human rights defenders, not only political opposition, but really civil society activists who are facing dire detention conditions for years to come. Some of them detained incommunicado with no right to access a lawyer, no access to medicine, no contact with the outside world whatsoever. And in these conditions, and no effort should be spared to demand the release and rehabilitation of these people, because there's a high risk that they would not come out of prison alive. We've seen it in Russia with Mr. Navalny. There have been, from my records, at least 6 people who died in 6 political prisoners who died in detention over the past years in Belarusian prisons. We don't want 1,400 of them to die. So a lot has to be done, and for this, the Mrs. Tikhanovskaya and her team and all the others, and the question of whether they are united or not is not really relevant in my view. The important thing is that they have the same discourse on this, maybe with variations on how to achieve it, and whether you negotiate with dictators, etc., with terrorists, etc. But all are absolutely convinced that these people have to be saved. There's really no other way to put it nowadays. The second important topic on which I also perceive the various voices as playing by the same partition is on the issue of the war and of the Belarus status as a co-aggressor, not a co-belligerent, but a co-aggressor nonetheless. And this is why they have an important role to play both inside Belarus, and I know they do it, trying to reach out to the civil society, to the population, to young men who might have to be forced to go and kill Ukrainians for fighting a war which is not theirs, which is Russia's war against Ukraine. And for this, the opposition is doing an incredible work in very, again, dangerous circumstances to inform the Belarusian public about the war, and to also do a lot of work internationally to explain to Ukrainians, for a start, and to the rest of the international community that Belarus is not Russia, and that the Belarusian people, the Belarusian population, is not Mr. Lukashenko's regime. And that, in that sense, currently, Belarus is sort of forced to play the partition which is dictated to it by the Kremlin, but at some and more than anything else, the actions or inactions of the current government in Belarus with regards to the war, we have to admit that the population of Belarus has absolutely no influence on it. So it's not their fault, basically. If their country is a co-aggressor, there's very little they could do to change that course of events. But things can happen, as you know, on the front. Things can happen in the region. Things can happen in Belarus. We know about the stability and resilience of these autocratic regimes. We think, but then as we say, everything was forever until it was no more. And they can collapse in a matter of days. And what is the third important element, in my view, when we talk about the opposition, is that it is ready. It has had 4 years to reflect on the situation, to draft roadmaps and strategies and very practical steps and guidelines for conducting the necessary reforms. Some of them in the field of human rights have been repeatedly recommended, for example, in my reports, but in many other domains, in the cultural field, in the field of education, in the field of constitutional law, the various experts in their field of expertise who are one way or another linked to the opposition or part of the opposition have done their homework. They have prepared a new constitution. They have reflected on what kind of parliamentarism, what kind of republic they want, about the role of regions, about the what has to be done to reform the justice system, to fight impunity. They have even reflected on the issue of lustration, because at some point it will have to be asked. This question is an important one, and you in the Baltic states are well aware about this. So in that sense, I believe that the opposition is united enough and strong enough because it is ready. When the moment comes, there might be, and it's a normal, I would say, in a democratic society, there might be infighting, and these people may be in some free and fair elections might compete against one another, and it's absolutely natural and healthy. But for the time being, the important thing is that they're united as to the values they want to defend, and the project that they want to have is to live in a free and democratic Belarus, which is not guilty of crimes against humanity or crimes of aggression against its neighbor, which is not a threat to regional security and to its neighbors.
Thank you, Dr. Marin. And with this, I would like to wrap up this episode of Riga Security Forum 2024. And we should remember, as Dr. Marin pointed out, and as Mr. Semanis also has told us, there are many scenarios how this can unfold, but Belarusian opposition is ready, and we should also be ready to support free and independent Belarus. Thank you. Thank you so much.